Land back. Welcome, welcome. We are live. The Revolutionary Book Trap, Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern.
With the Black Hammer organization. So this is
Yes.
Chief Ali and Chief Ismat here joining us. Land back, DP. So we are reading Leila Khaled this week, chapter 3 and 4. I'm so excited. Let's share, get people in here. We're going to be starting in a couple minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Ismat, I love the poster behind you.
Thank you. The flag. I finally bought it.
It looks great. I need to get one. Land back, Sia.
Land back, Chief.
Welcome, everybody. Let's share, get those people in here, get that political education.
Make sure you share this link in every group that you're in, all your chapters or your committees.
Let me share right now, too.
This is Chief Ismat and Chief Ali for the Revolutionary Book Trap on this Sunday with Black Hammer Organization.
Land back. Hey, Ina, good morning. Hey, Lay, land back, good morning. So excited to get this political education, free Palestine, free the whole world, starting with political education. Chief Ish, yeah.
Land back.
All right, let's keep sharing, get those people in here. The numbers are growing, I see. Share to your committees, share to your friends, share to your parents.
I would. Okay.
Share to the guy at the corner store, share to your masjid.
Share everywhere. Land back.
Land back, Tiffany.
Welcome. So we're going to be discussing My People Shall Live. It's a book by revolutionary Palestinian Leila Khaled. This is Chief Ali and Chief Ismat.
Yeah, so we're going to be reading chapter 3 and 4 this week, going over a little bit about the overall political history, a little bit about Leila's activity as she's getting more politically aware, what group she's becoming a part of. And so we're going to see a lot of the parallels and other struggles represented in Palestine with Leila Khaled. Thank you for sharing, Ina. And we're also going to be talking about our newest project with Black Hammer Organization, which is Hammer City. We're building an entire city, getting some land to try to have a place for us to live, us colonized people to live, where there's no rent, no cops, no coronavirus, and no colonizers or white people. We need to get our communities free. And so this is Hammer City. We're going to be collecting funds for it. We've picked out a spot in land in Florida right now, going to be putting that back into the control of the indigenous people of that land to overturn colonialism at its root, basically.
Please make sure we're donating as much as we can to Hammer City. People can start donating now. That would be awesome.
Yeah, we have Cash App, GoFundMe. It's gofundme.com/build Hammer City. I think we've raised over $34,000 so far, which is amazing. Yes. I'm so excited.
Excited to move to Hammer City.
Okay, so let's get into it. So chapter 3 and 4 of the My People Shall Live, Leila Khaled. These two chapters are a little bit different. The first one is titled Exile in Kuwait, goes over Leila Khaled's history and also a little bit of history about the overall Arab nationalist movement, the revolutionary movement in Palestine, and the entire Arab nation, which spans the Middle East, a little bit North Africa, that whole area. And then the second chapter is a little bit more in detail about Leila Khaled's personal life and some of the activities she's going through.
Land back. So Where did we want to start?
Talk about maybe the idea of Arab nationalism, like what that means to you and how Leila Khaled described it.
Well, there's a paragraph here in the book when she experiences when her, I'm sorry, when her principal at the school, she tells her, well, you're not even Palestinian, why are you caring so much about the cause? Because the school where she was teaching told her that, or told the students that they weren't allowed to do like any political activity unless you're Palestinian. Then you could join the Palestinian movement. And she was like saying how, even if she wasn't Palestinian, for one, she is a Palestinian woman. And then she was saying how even if she isn't Palestinian, she's still Arab, and it's not like Arab people are like a race, because we've all experienced colonialism differently at the hands of European powers. And she talks about also the fall of the United Arab Republic, and how over time people started losing hope because there was no centralized organization for Palestinian people or Arab people, and their only hope with the Egypt president Nasser was gone over time, because he over time became a puppet of the Western powers. And so with Palestinian nationalism, it's I tend to think of nationalism as a negative thing, especially like thinking of white supremacy and things like that. But nationalism is also like super empowering for people who are colonized. It can be super empowering to have that, your heritage, your culture, and things like that. And it was also important politically with those revolutionary movements across the Middle East. Land back.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely agree with that. And I like the opening here, the first couple paragraphs of page 33 here. It talks about how nationalism was an idea that was imported into the Middle East. Before colonialism, there was no real idea of nationalism. It was people in these various regions in the Middle East. Many of them spoke Arabic. Many of them had similar religions, a lot of Muslims, Jews, and Christians, all kind of living in harmony. But this idea of borders and nations didn't really exist. And this was something that was imposed from the outside. And so just on one hand, that we had these borders and countries imposed on us through colonialism. On the other hand, the opening paragraph here talks about how nationalism was an idea to unite these colonial borders as a contrast to colonization from Europe, basically. And so she says that students and reformers were the first to espouse the nationalist ideas and organize Arab clubs. From the outset, Arab intellectuals were at the forefront. Arab soldiers and officers in the Ottoman armies joined the intellectuals at the turn of the century, particularly after the Ottomans launched their Turkification policy. So the Ottoman Empire was around for hundreds of years, from like the year 1300 to right after World War I. And so that included both like Turkey, some parts of North Africa, and the entire Middle East as well. But it was only when the French started invading in the late 1700s and the English started invading in the late 1800s that this idea of nationalism kind of took over, and the Ottomans were just starting to freak out. They're like, oh, we see all these other European nations are starting to get stronger. We got to get stronger. And so the Ottomans really started to squeeze the Arab people and to, for lack of a better word, oppress them. And so in the second paragraph here, we have, so Al-Afghani, one of these intellectuals, regarded the problems facing Islam as one of civilization and community. They thought that the Napoleonic invasions of Egypt in 1798 and subsequent takeovers of the Arab West by France and in occupation of Egypt by Britain in 1882 were a repeat of the medieval wars of Islam and Christendom. To them, the answer was clear. Therefore, the Muslim world had to react as a community to withstand the onslaught to defeat the West. They had this mistaken idea that Arab and Muslim were one, and this is kind of the idea of Arab nationality. But then she talks about a little bit later this idea, this limited idea of thinking that, oh, it's only the Muslims who are oppressed and only the Muslims need to get together. They didn't have this overall picture. that we're all oppressed by colonialism, and this is why some of the first movements were a little bit weak. Land back.
Land back. And I think that's also really important because outside, like, this also relates to the PE, that the centralized PE that we've been reading during our meetings, how like this whole like outside of this context it doesn't make sense, but it was also taught to us to like think and like believe this way because like somehow like the West is better. um yeah, so so I'm on the fourth paragraph at the near the very end when it says um more importantly. So I'm gonna read. More importantly, however, the Ba'ath tied the idea of Arab unity with the concept of socialist humanism and placed socialism anew on the agenda of the Arab nation. And so the Ba'ath was the organization that was working also in like some liberation movement, and that what they tried to do. Um, it's the paragraph after that. It starts with it to infuse, but it's at the end of the paragraph. So I think this related. I once I was reading it. It related. For me, it related to our works in Black Hammer, in Black Hammer organization, with our project with our project in Black Hammer City, and how we are trying to relate this project and like meet the masses where they're at, and just try to like, so after they're seeing all of this, death, all of this oppression, and they are seeing, especially with the pandemic and everything, they're seeing all of those things around them, and there is no hope. And if we're able to provide hope, leadership, and guidance, and a materialistic solution, and we're putting this new revolution, not necessarily new, but I think a lot of people may be scared or shy away from revolutionary thought, but putting this on their agenda of the colonized people here and all over. um I think that can give hope and give people something to look forward to, that they feel that they are able to change things in their living situations and things like that. Laying back.
Land back. Yeah, definitely people want to be hopeful about something, so they're looking to see what of these movements can be successful. And I see we got a great question from Leigh Jammer. How does religion play into Arab nationalism? The mainstream news focuses on religious division a lot, but I'm suspicious of that narrative after this chapter. That's a great question. So one of the initial ideas behind Arab nationalism, or this kind of preliminary sort of revolutionariness, was religious unity. And that was pushed a lot by some of the early movements. And all those movements, though, were pretty unsuccessful. So Leila Khaled writes here, to infuse the ideas of nationalism with socialist content required approximately half a century of turmoil and at least 3 major defeats for the prevailing feudal and petty bourgeois regimes. And this is a characteristic of a lot of the early movements, that they sought to unify the people, but only have a certain subset in power. So maybe it was the intellectuals who would be in power, or maybe it was the military people in power, or maybe it was the Muslims who would be in power. And each of these times, well, they haven't exactly been successful yet. And so it's this kind of narrow-minded opportunism rather than uniting all of the Arab people. And one of the things that Leila Khaled talks about in this chapter a little bit later on is that what she wants and what her groups are fighting for is the unity of all the different classes of all the different religions into a unified socialist Arab nation, which guarantees human rights for all, provides for people, and ends colonialism, basically.
Laying back. And to add to that also, the religion, what it does, in my view, it works. This divide in religion works to divide us even further. then we are divided with his political views and things like that. So so to say that like she was saying here in the first paragraph, like to say that Arabs are Muslims and Muslims are Arabs, that doesn't only take away from someone's identity, like personally, but also as a movement. It bows to like Orientalism and to colonialism that sees, West versus East, us versus them, all those things. And so like for example, for Palestine, if it wasn't so significant to Muslim people, because it's significant within our beliefs also, would a lot of people like care to free Palestine? You know, if we don't look at this, is this further divide, and this is something that we keep emphasizing within our second principle of unity, that that the people these differences are meaningless. These differences are a way for the colonial powers to further divide us. So if we are hitting on each other, we don't see our true unity, we don't see our true power, and we don't we don't work together to overturn this contradiction that is colonialism. Line back.
Exactly, yeah. On the third paragraph on the first page, page 33, Leila Khaled also answers this a little bit when she says the Arab response to basically the fall of the Ottoman Empire and all the shit that the Ottomans started doing. Up a little bit. 33, the bottom of 33. Yeah, right there. The Arab response was anguished shock. They had to learn quickly that Muslims were not all brothers and Turks were not Arabs, that the world was no longer run by religious bigots, but by capitalists, that states and parties seek alliances on the basis of mutual interests, not religious affiliations, that Arabs must alter their view of the world or remain subjugated. There was no specific party to cope with these issues, but there were individuals and groups based in Beirut, Cairo, Damascus. There were some nationalist officers, and then skipping a sentence, those officers, the intellectuals and students, constituted the cadre of the Great Arab Revolution of 1916 during World War I, where the Arabs revolted against the Ottoman Empire, and then France and Britain used that to split up the Middle East into what we have today. The net result of that revolution was a proclamation of a Damascus-based Arab state in 1920 that eventually failed, no longer exists. But the revolution and its leaders were rapidly suppressed and dispersed. The eastern part of the Arab world was dismembered and occupied by the British and French. They had two treaties, one in 1916, the Sykes-Picot Treaty, which split up Lebanon and Syria along some like made-up lines, which caused a lot of like turmoil and warfare to this day. And then Iraq, Palestine, and Transjordan were given to Britain. So Transjordan at the time, it was both, well, it involved like, I think parts of Jordan and also parts of Palestine on like some older borders. And then through the warfare we'll get into a little bit later in this chapter, that eventually became Jordan. But we see that these colonial powers basically just chopped up the Middle East. They exploited the weakness of these revolutionary leaders that were trying to impose things from the top down rather than uniting with all the people. The colonizers exploited the turmoil and lack of unity and the petty bourgeois nature where you have a bunch of people trying to sell out. And this led to what Chief Ismat was saying, the Ba'ath Party, which was kind of one step further. They started getting towards like social democracy. They had liberalism and human rights, but still, even in some of these early movements, they didn't quite unite with the masses of the poor and colonized working people to have a strong front to overturn colonialism. And so we'll see now going a little bit forward, we had this early nationalist movement. We had that led into World War I, where it kind of fell apart, the Ba'ath movement. And then next, Leila Khaled is going to talk a little bit about the limitations of the Ba'ath movement.
Laying back. I like how you're doing it also by like time period that's easier to understand. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the relationships with Egypt, with Gamal Abdel Nasser, because the Popular Front had been an ally with Egypt for a long time, because Gamal Abdel Nasser had been turning. Egypt was the strongest Arab country and the strongest nation. Arab nation. And Gamal Abdel Nasser had this socialist ideas, had, you know, worked with the Soviet Union closely to build this dam, had cared about the people, had represented the people. And over time, all of this was gone. All of it was gone. And so in uh, in page maybe in the paragraph that starts to a number of nationalists, um, in this paragraph, um, she talks about how the Popular Front, how the organizations were replacing one another, and there was like a lot of like, it wasn't, like I said before, it wasn't centralized, the Palestinian strength. Yes, so this is like the different organizations that were at different times, and like how who became what and things like that. And then a little bit after, in 1963, um it's right there, yeah. In the 1963, the movement was in a state of flux. Revolutionary radical nationalism was posed as the new alternative. The social question was becoming the focal point. It was this prospect and the intellectual and moral challenges it entailed that I pondered when I was a member. The nuclei of the ANM, that's the Arab National Movement, was organized by a group of students and graduates from the American University of Beirut in 1940s, and she was part of this. The most important figures were Dr. George Habash, Walid Haddad, Hani al-Hindi, Ahmed al-Khatib. The initial cadre were mostly Palestinians who were appalled by the Arab disaster of 1948. So this she tells you about the organizations and how the organizations were different over time. And then the paragraph after, the creation of Zionist state gave the movement the necessary impetus. Okay. The creation of the Zionist state gave the movement the necessary impetus for growth. The leaders were populist, anti-imperialist, ultra-nationalist. To them, nationalism and anti-imperialism were the principle of preoccupation. So this is also kind of wrong, because at the time, were they even, because like we agreed on before, Europeans were the ones who brought on colonialism, and those things did not exist like before then, and they're the ones who spread and expanded their empire and said, oh, like, oh, we're gonna colonize people and we can do this and that. And then Israel was the principal enemy, the Arab masses were the principal friend. Because of these political propositions, the young nationalists fought in the 1950s against entangling Western alliances. I know this word is easier. Against the Hashemiyya in Jordan and Iraq, against Arab advocates of Western capitalist ideas. As the movement evolved, Nasser attained stardom in the firmaments of the Third World by concluding the famous Czechoslovakia arms deal with the Soviets bloc and nationalizing Suez. So this also like this the different allies, and this like, okay, I'm having a hard time talking. Chief Ali, do you have something to add
You're
to
doing great.
here?
You're doing great. Yeah, I think this is a really, excuse me, this is a key paragraph here for two reasons. In the previous paragraph, I'll just mention it briefly. It's mentioned that the Arab nationalist movement, some of these kind of adolescent or like in the intermediary years, the Arab nationalist movement was the new kid on the block, basically. Kind of Ba'ath had gone away, and so now there's the Arab nationalist movement. This started in the American University of Beirut. So we see that through colonialism, we have an American university in Beirut, which is literally like the American school system, just in this colonized country. And the education, this started, and colonialism started to spark anti-colonialism. So again, we see kind of this two sides here. And then also the same thing in this paragraph, the creation of Zionist state gave the movement necessary impetus for growth. So again, this balancing of the two sides. And I think one of the limitations is they see that Israel is the principal enemy rather than global colonialism, because we know that Israel is nothing without its Western backing, without its Western power. It has no uniqueness of its own. It just gets all its money and arms and training from the US government and the entire colonial bloc. But we're starting to see the narrowing of the Arab people as they as an entire nation of people all across start to develop and see who are our actual enemies here and how do we start to get past it, basically. So this is the formation of this revolutionary kernel, or this core, and we see it can either go in a revolutionary movement with Arab nationalist movement, or it could be it could go in the way of the neo-colonial sellouts, like you have the Hashemites in Jordan, the leaders of Jordan, who they basically got awarded this little kingdom, and they want to keep their little plot of desert land because they can get some nice fancy cars, and they get to have palaces in Jordan and luxury estates in London, literally. And so we see the neo-colonials, and then we see the actual revolutionaries, and the interplay between them is starting to educate the Arab people about what are the actual divisions at stake here. It's not religion. It's not whether you're Jewish or Muslim. It's not whether you're Israeli or whatever. It's kind of, are you going to side with colonialism or are you not going to side with colonialism?
Lying back. Thank you, Chief. And then, can we go to the paragraph after that? At the end of the paragraph, where it says the A&M revolutionism. Yes, this paragraph? Okay. Maybe it's the next page.
It's the end of the first paragraph
Yes,
on page 36.
It's right there, yeah. The A&M revolutionism was replacing it by in the post-June War period, the A&M revolutionism became a magnet of the Arab masses, the galvanizing forces of the poor, the weak, and the wretched with the Arab world. In a nutshell, the question that posed itself was, who shall govern the colonels or the people? We in the Arab Work Socialist Party say the people. That's why we contend that the revolution is coming. That's why I became a full-time revolutionary. In the spring of okay. So stopping here, the rest is kind of like a different topic. But stopping here, like, this is like also just people coming to their, like, this just goes back to like the question of self-determination for the people, because who's gonna govern if colonialism came out of nowhere and said, well, this place is ours, and the people are becoming like aware, or like teaching the people are, because of their environment, they are learning a new system of things. They're relearning how they see their world because of colonialism, and they're learning that, hold on a minute, like, that this shouldn't, like, our self-determination and our power over our land, our labor, and all of those things, that this is the question of self-determination that is really important. Because and like the last sentence is also like powerful. That's why I became a full-time revolutionary. Just realizing how, like, it wasn't gonna work very easily if you listen, like, to what they're saying and do what they're asking of you to do. Instead, like, honestly, just revolutionary work, honestly. But this is what I had to say about it, Len Beck.
Yeah, I think that paragraph's good because it's talking about what happened in 1967, and 1967 was an eventful year, as we'll see in a little bit, for many reasons. But just as a little bit of context, so we're talking a lot about Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the socialist Egyptian leader. He was, I guess, kind of a social democrat. He played a little bit both sides between the West and the Soviet bloc in the East. He had some socialist policies, but he didn't really have that mass movement to really unite people. And it was kind of, as Leila Khaled wrote, the who shall govern the colonels of the people. With Gamal Abdel Nasser, it was the people. But so we could see the extent that Gamal Abdel Nasser's ideology, for lack of a better word, how far that could go. And as a little bit of background history, so in 1948, Israel was proclaimed. That was the Nakba, when there were a lot of refugees. There was the mass exodus of people, and then so some of these Arab nationalist movement, for example, was founded 4 years after in 1952. In all of the 50s, there were the Fedayeen fighters who were basically, that word just means militant. So there were Fedayeen fighters all across Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all the surrounding nations. But in 1956, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, he was trying to not be so friendly to the West, basically, to these colonial powers. And so Israel got then the British and the French to bomb and invade Egypt in the Suez Canal. There was some little war. Eventually, the colonial powers lost. But as a result of that, Gamal Abdel Nasser banned the Fedayeen, like guerrilla militant fighters, from Egypt. And then Egypt and Nasser gained kind of administrative control over Gaza, like the Gaza Strip, on Israel's behalf. And so we can start to see that there's almost this like calcification or solidification where this very bureaucratic top-down government of the colonels and these bureaucrats, it has its limitations because it's always trying to basically create this false sense of peace without justice and not try to ruffle colonial feathers too much. And so the movement there with the Gamal Abdel Nasser and the Ba'ath and other these kind of liberal social democrats, not really like true revolutionaries, it starts to end. It basically starts to end towards the end of the 1960s. In the 1960s, there was the Six-Day War we'll get into. Also notable in 1967 was the founding of, there's like a war in Yemen, in South Yemen. They were doing an anti-colonial revolutionary war in Yemen. The British were there previously. The British are fucking everywhere. But in terms of the revolution in South Yemen, Gamal Abdel Nasser and these social democrat liberals had one bureaucratic like revolutionary group, but then the ANM, the Arab Nationalist Movement, had an actual like mass-based guerrilla revolutionary group, and it was the mass-based group that actually was able to win in South Yemen. They formed a communist country there called the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, and so 1967 was a bad year for the Social Democrats, for these bureaucrats, for these petty bourgeoisie, like military leaders. They basically hit a wall, and they've kind of fell apart after that. And so 1967, that's when we see a big split, and some of these new parties start to form. And Leila Khaled, she kind of skips around to each one and notices some limitations of each one before she finally finds the one that she likes.
Laying back. So we want to continue talking about the corruption of Egypt and how over time Gamal Abdel Nasser, how corruption spread slowly but very clearly in the Egyptian leadership. But let's take a break and ask for donations for Hammer City. So we're building Hammer City. It's going to be in Florida. Hammer City, the draft of the Constitution has been written by indigenous people of the Turtle Island, and they are practicing self-determination through that. Hammer City is going to have no cops, no rent, no coronavirus. We're all going to be taking care of each other. It's going to be communal living. It's a dream. It's a dream, but it's reality. So let's get in some donations for Hammer City before we move on. Let me look at the comments.
Pull up the comments too. Yeah, so we're talking about like colonialism in Palestine and having the people actually control it. And so this is what we're doing. We're building this. We're showing people that it is possible.
Mm-hmm. Land back.
Who's about to donate?
Let's make sure we're sharing the link. Let's reshare the link to our group chats. And yes, who's donating? Let's get some donations.
Cash App, Build Hammer City, GoFundMe.com/Build Hammer City. We're trying to get people free, get us all free. And we need to do this by uniting with the people. And we can do that by showing that it's possible that we can build our own cities, because we've done it before, but we've just done it for the white people, for colonial powers. Chief Rob Vini, you got $5 in the Hammer City. Land back. Thank you so much.
Land back. Thank you, Chief. Let's build Hammer City. Let's go. We got $10 now.
One of the things Leila Khaled talks about is that you can't just talk about this stuff. You have to actually put your resources and your body on the line.
Land back. We have been building, unfortunately, working towards white power. So let's destroy white power and and put our works together for Black Power and returning the land. Land back, we're getting more donation. Thank you, comrades.
I'm not seeing all the comments on Facebook. Oh, Alex, Chief Lay, land
From
back on
YouTube.
YouTube. Amazing. Land back. So
Land
good to have
back.
that revolutionary support. Chief Chris, $10. Thank you so much.
Land back.
We're almost up to the $35,000 mark on our GoFundMe. So little by little, we're building this.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. All
Let's
those people
get
getting together.
one more donation before we move on. One more donation for Hammer City.
Jamie, that's right. Let's get this done together. Please donate if you can. Absolutely.
Let's put our labor together, our monies together, resources, so we can build a better future for our children.
And once we unite, we can win. That's it. It's so easy.
Yes. Land back.
One more donation.
One more donation before we move on. Let's build Hammer City.
Yeah. Land back, everybody.
Land back.
Oh, 20
Let's go. Land back.
Thank
you, comrades. Thank you, comrades.
Probably mispronounced it. Amazing. Thank you so much for the support, everybody. This is amazing.
Going back into the text, the paragraph that starts in the spring of 1963, I'm going to start reading.
On page 36, yep.
In the spring of 1963, Israel was 15 years old. Instead of rekindling the Arab spirit and resuming its historic mission after the breakup of UAR, Nasserism was becoming inward-looking, repressive, managerial, economically bourgeoisie. It became a spent force in historical terms. The Yemen intervention in the National Charter of May 1962 notwithstanding. Statesmanship, economic progress, political stability were touted as the hallmark of Egyptian regime. The UAR placed advertisements in the New York Times inviting monopolitics investors to share its profitable state enterprise. Gone were the days when Nasser spoke and Western industry came to a halt for the lack of oil. Gone were the days when Nasser spinned the revolutionary slogans and the Arab masses seized and burned embassies. Gone were the days when Western prime ministers were treated like messenger boys suffocated at in public. Yet, in spite of this turnabout, we in the A&M remained Nasser's supporter until 1967. And I think this is a really powerful paragraph because it shows how Nasser was really he was this wonderful leader, and then slowly he became a puppet of the West. I keep repeating this, but it's like very significant in the Arab history and very significant for revolutionary history. And like I'm just thinking about the fact of oil existing in the Middle East. Oil existing in the Middle East, that makes us so powerful. Like that makes us so powerful because that's what the US wants. And instead of being like, no, we don't want to give you oil until you do this and this and that or whatever. Like how it was easy to lose this like point of power. It's like this point of power or this like really important resource. How it became like, think right now today's world in the of the UAE, think of Saudi Arabia, think of like those allies and those armed forces that the whatever like it's just so saddening for me. It's so saddening. I'm like, we could have freed Palestine, whatever, like but it's this is the importance also of political education, because we're going to talk more about importance of political education also. I think we should move to the next chapter perhaps because it's half the time, but just the importance of it also, just like being aware, because you cannot just be disorganized in your movement. You cannot just do whatever and hope it works. You can't just demand things from those governments. We can say free Palestine, use hashtag BLM, whatever, all of those things that people are believing in, just the trend on social media, all of those things. But how is it actually changing? How is it actually changing if we're not aware? Because, the US government and those places, like, they study revolutionaries really hard. And if we're not doing the same by studying our history and studying our being organized and being strong, how are we going to defeat them? So, land back.
Thank you for that comment, Comrade Tobani from South Africa. I love Black Hammer so much and its spirits and commitment. From Brian. Land back, thank you for the support. We're trying to get in this united together. Yeah, so we're talking about all this high level stuff, and absolutely we can see how the liberal, democratic, socialists, these people are not actually revolutionary talking with the people. They just hit a wall. They become like neocolonial sellouts, either accidentally, kind of like Gamal Abdel Nasser, or intentionally, like the leaders of Jordan and Saudi Arabia, where they just want to get money and then they don't care who else. And so that's why in Black Hammer, our second point of unity, third point of unity is that all of the problems that poor and working class colonized people face, people of color who have to work to survive and to live, like all of our problems are not just from colonialism and the Western power, but also the sellouts basically who are submissive to these colonial interests. And we can see that overall. And so we're talking about all this high level stuff with the leaders, but there are two little snippets here that I just wanted to tie back, because during this whole time, there are still refugees. People are still kicked out of their homes. They can't return. Families are being split. And I feel like this happens everywhere. Like in Korea, families are split. Or Yemen, families are split. In Palestine, families are split. And there's a little snippet on page 37 where the third to last paragraph on page 37, Leila Khaled is talking about how her mom and her dad were trying to go visit with their family, and mother went without him to go visit grandma. The meeting was a nightmare of barbed wire. When grandmother saw mother, she presumed her son must have died, and she collapsed. My aunts, cousins, and mother carried on a teary dialogue for about an hour. Little or nothing was said beyond conveying greetings and fleeting reminiscences. We were all drenched with tears. We looked at each other, whether a reunion would ever be possible, and no one could utter a coherent sentence. We parted, infuriated at the Zionist overlord. So one, I just want to underscore the tragedy. This is not just an economic question. People's lives are being ruined. They're being torn apart from their families, and this is still going on. But then, just as an Arab, one of this part also made me like laugh, cry a little bit, because they met for a whole hour and they didn't have any time to say anything aside from greetings, because Arabs love their greetings. We say hello, and we say hello like 20 different times, and we greet each other 20 different times. And, we want to meet for longer, but we can't because of colonialism. And the only thing we can do is have time to ask, how's your health? How's your family? Kayf sahtik? Over and over. So that was just an Arab moment. That was good.
Land back. Agreed with that. My notes with this paragraph is the importance of storytelling, and later in the paragraph she talks about how when she met up with other Palestinians who lived in refugee camps or who tried to visit, there was just a lot of heartbreaking stories of death and just disturbing things that she had heard in stories, and I think that there's also power in storytelling. So that was my comment on it also.
And then also on the bottom of page 38, just on this like idea of tears, because this comes up like in quick succession, Leila Khaled was noting that when JFK died, John F. Kennedy, the US president, died in 1963, she cried. And she said that, like, I watched the funeral on TV and saw Americans weep. Until then, I thought the United States a nation of monsters and scoundrels capable of perpetuating every conceivable crime. I revised my views slightly, but then Lyndon Johnson's rapacity and Nixon's hypocrisy reinforced the original image. And I just thought, like, colonized people, we are in touch with our emotions, we're in touch with our humanity. And even when it's not helpful, we try to see the humanity in our colonizers. But this is I feel a mistaken notion. Like, as someone who has grown up for most of their life in the US is a nation of monsters and scoundrels capable of everything. Like, don't shed some tears, because you may see humanity in them, but they don't see humanity in you. And it's important to keep focused and to not get sidetracked and tricked, because, the colonizers will try to be tricking you. So I just want to bring up that part on emotion as well.
Land back, land back, land back. Thank you, Chief. That was beautiful. Thank you, Chief. I think we want to move on to chapter 4. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe I could just quickly run through like the different organizations, because we had like
Yeah.
Israel's doing some bad stuff. They it goes into like a lot of detail in chapter 3. It took me a while to read through it, but during this time, Leila Khaled's teaching in Kuwait. She's not really revolutionary active. She's just following along. She's having issues with her apolitical teachers, and just seeing this Arab disunity. Basically, Israel at the same time is they're noticing, they're like, the colonizers are not dumb, they're smart, and they're seeing that, oh, the Arabs are disunited. So Israel starts stealing water. There's this river called the Jordan River between Jordan and Palestine and Israel, and they redirect all the water into Israel. And they have this really fucked up notion that Arab is this gem in the desert, and they've made the desert green. Yeah, they made the desert green by messing up the ecology. They've the Dead Sea, which is fed by the Jordan River, is shrinking to this day. That was in 1965. In 1965 also, a different revolutionary group was formed, Fatah, which means overcome the enemy. And so at this time, we didn't even talk about the PLO. So all these neo-colonial leaders and these bureaucrats, they formed the PLO, which is this Palestine Liberation Organization. It was one of the first revolutionary ones, but it also wasn't really connected to the people. And then because it wasn't connected, a different one formed, Fatah, which was a little bit more revolutionary. But and so Leila Khaled just she was frustrated with each one, and she would go from one to the other. She was originally in PLO, then she went to Fatah, and she got frustrated there. And during this time also, don't forget, there's she was going, the world went through the Korean War and then the Vietnam War, and the U.S. There's a little paragraph here where she mentions the U.S. invaded Santo Domingo, which references back to our past book we read, The Black Jacobin. And just overall, this led to this 6-day war when Jordan and Egypt tried to invade Israel, but they completely failed, where they total decimation and loss of Egypt's military. And Nasser had to step down. His whole idea of this bureaucratic social democracy, not actually tied to the people, was completely dead at that point. And so from then, Fatah started to being a little bit popular, and also we start to see the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine come in. And then that leads us to chapter 4, I think. So talking a little bit more detail about these groups. I'm back.
Thank you, Chief. Okay.
There's just so much good stuff here.
Okay, I'm going to read from, my pages are a bit off, but it's it starts with the defeating verbal, with in chapter 4. Maybe it's the second page of the chapter, or the beginning of the third page of the chapter.
What's the first sentence say?
Oh, the deafening verbal blast. Okay, the deafening verbal blast at the UN only concealed the political chicanery. The vanquished accepted a ceasefire on the basis of accomplished military conquest. The UN passed no resolution in demanding Israeli withdrawal. It merely established observer groups on both sides of the Suez Canal, and the Israelis settled down to building nabals, paramilitary colonies, and Hubutism all over the area referred to firstly as the Concord, then administrative zone, and now liberated territories. The Soviets and Americans returned to the regular autumn session of the General Assembly and delivered more bombast. Okay,
reiterated. Yeah.
there we go. Their previous position and presented the same resolutions. The Arab diplomats talked as if they were conquerors and demanded complete Israeli withdrawal. They invoked the principle of Western morality and justice, not realizing that those very principles were the ones that were used to justify Zionist humanity towards the Arabs. Finally, there was the agreement of the 242. So this obviously won't work. um, because if you're going by their rules, they are using this whatever we are saying that Palestinian people are dying. Palestinian people are now refugees. They don't have a home. They don't have a land, because of Zionism. Um, this exact same thing is what they use to say, well, Jewish people need a place to stay. Not thinking back to Zionism. When was Zionism created? In what, the 1800s, late 1800s, I think. I don't know the exact time. um and it was a product, of colonialism. It was, an embodiment of imperialist state, a settler colonial state in Palestine. And not looking back on those facts, they're not looking back on those facts because the UN was even created by those Western powers anyway. So obviously this wasn't gonna work. Land back.
Yeah, this is a really key paragraph as well. Like, just that we have, even in the past, in the 60s and today, you have Arab leaders who talk a big game about, oh, Palestine should stop doing this. But then that's just words, and they don't have any actual strength to rely on. They're just saying, like, they're invoking principles of Western morality and justice, not realizing those are the ones used to justify Zionist humanity towards the Arabs. And also in this paragraph, you see that the Soviets are also complicit in this. A lot of people, like, okay, absolutely, when the Soviet Union ended in like the 90s, a lot of like bad stuff happened throughout all the world. But even then, and even this time, the Soviets weren't really united with the anti-colonial struggle. They were also trying to keep the peace, for the lack of a better part. They had this idea that we could have peaceful coexistence with colonialism, capitalism, and then this was kind of a mistaken idea that eventually led to their downfall, and it also led to a lot of harm on the, from colonized people the world over, like in Palestine, like in Yemen, a lot of other places. And then also here, that paragraph talked about how Israel is building these kibbutzim, which are these little, basically communes. It's like a Zionist colonial version of Hammer City. And they have this idea that, oh, we can have self-determination for these basically white Zionist Jews in Israel. And it's this very racist colonialist view of socialism. And if you'll talk to some liberals or Zionists today, they say that, oh, Israel is a socialist state. But Israel's, it may be in some like extremely racist colonialist way, but that's why it's important to not only just talk about socialism and having the people work together, but like the bigger contradiction is colonialism. So that's why Black Hammer, we don't lead with, oh, we're an anti-capitalist organization. I mean, we are in some ways, but the main contradiction, the main thing that we're struggling for is against colonialism, because from colonialism, then we have imperialism, racism, capitalism, all this other stuff. And if you don't have that idea that colonialism is at the forefront, you could have this mistaken kind of white nationalist idea, like Ku Klux communists, we sometimes call it, of like this fake socialism. So I just wanted to point that out there.
Land back. Thank you so much, Chief. Later in the chapter, she talks about like Jane, this white girl who comes to live with them, and Jane was basically saying like all of those things about like, oh, like poor Israeli people, they need like a place to live. Like, oh, like the Arab people are savage and they don't know what they're doing, and we need this balance of power. We need all of those things. And she says that they tried to tell her that the issue is not the territory but the imperialism and Zionism, and whether the Arabs or Jewish masses were going to determine their future for themselves or allow the vampire of American and Zionist high finance to determine it for them. So this again goes back to self-determination. And also this like clearly says that the enemy is not Jewish people. The enemy is colonialism. And this was also something that I did a lot of thinking about, um, Zionism as it is a form of white supremacy. Like, if you think, if it's just white supremacy in practice, and it makes me think about all those mass shootings, and like how they stem, of course, like not gun whatever, like gun laws or whatever. It's white supremacy that's the issue. Um, and it just makes me think of like how much like we're hated. And it's not because like the reason they hate us is because they want to genocide us, and they want us to be gone it's because that's like we kind of like stand in the way of their projects, because we are united and we are strong, and they see how much we how they see our strength, and they're so afraid of us. That's the truth. They're so afraid of us. They're so afraid of our power. Line back.
They just want to steal our lives, labor, land, and resources.
Mm-hmm. They know that that's the only way that they can get where they are. Line back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the part with Jane where they had this like exchange student was wild because they would get into all these debates, and you could really see how this liberal worldview, it's almost like alternate reality, because some of their things like they make sense, but they don't see colonized people. I think the issue is that at the root they don't see colonized people as truly human. So they'll be aware of, oh, there's this violence, or oh, people are being oppressed, or oh, like people are starving, but then they don't care because they see this as like this girl Jane was like, oh, this is justified because the Soviets are trying to like, so the Soviets and communism are trying to take over, and this idea that for the poor and working class colonized people of the world, like it's if you're a capitalist or a colonizer, it's you prefer that you would like slaughter and kill these colonized people rather than have them have control over their own lands. Because as you said, Chief Ismat, when we have control of our own lands, that's going to get in the way of their projects. They're looting and polluting of the earth and all this other stuff. And then, yeah, at the end of like on the topic of Jane, at the end of page 54, yeah, I gasped when I read this paragraph because it's the one, "Are you a refugee, Leila?" So Jane, this white American colonizer girl, says, "Are you a refugee, Leila?" Technically, yes, I said. Emotionally, no. I am no longer a refugee because I'm a revolutionary. Jane looked around her and surveyed our apartment building and then pointedly asked, "Do you expect to live in Palestine more luxuriously than you are living here in Beirut, if and when you go to Palestine?" "Perhaps not, but that's not important," I answered. "It is very important," she said, "because you wouldn't give up what you have here and you're not doing anything personally to reach your goals." Jane stunned me. My mind went blank. I thought for a minute and admitted, "Jane, you're right. I'm only talking. I haven't done anything concrete." Um, the Palestinians are hardworking people, but they are a dissipated people, and a good many have educated themselves well, but so few, including my family, the Khaled family, are doing anything to express their collective existence as a people. And then, yeah, skipped a sentence. "We must act, not just talk, and memorize the arguments against Zionisms. We have to act." And so this I thought was a key sentence because it really informed me that this idea of what we talk about sometimes in Black Hammer, is class suicide, which is that if you have the material means or you have the educational means to recognize the issues that are facing our communities, basically colonialism, capitalism, all this stuff, like it's your duty to spend all that you can to fight this, not just talk about it in this abstract way, not just like, I don't know, go on Twitter and like talk stuff there, but like you have to really commit your life fully to it, and otherwise you're not doing anything. So I want to underscore that.
This is what makes us different from white leftists. Like, all they do is read theory and talk. And like there's no materialistic change. There's no like what are you actually doing, like, except for like tweeting and like being in group chats and like sharing like this like theory or whatever. Like, yeah, that's yeah. Okay. After this, she talks about joining the Palestinian Front Liberation Movement. And she talks about, so she was part of Fatah, In Fatih, she talks about how the rise of Fatih. So Fatih became stronger and stronger because of their different, because they were truly more revolutionary. Excuse me. And the Arab worlds, or the Arab government, relied on that, instead of like doing their own um like liberation movement or whatever. Like the Arab governments were like, oh, Fatih is doing it and that's it. But Fatih had did not have a strong leadership. Did not have the resources. Is very important. Didn't have. They were very weak with their armed struggle. Um, and she was also like unhappy like there, because she was like, I'm not actually doing anything. And then finally she met somebody.
Wait, I want to say something about Fatah
Yes.
a little bit, because she had some. So she was originally in like the Arab nationalist movement and the PLO a little bit, and then like Fatah was the new thing on the scene. They were cool. They led some protests and shit, but that had a lot of problems. They had some like shady bureaucracy stuff. They took money from Israel and some other suspect places. They were also pretty sexist too. So a lot of this chapter, Leila is talking about how she's really looking for a revolutionary movement that values her as a woman. And like the Arab people, like, you know, most all nations over worldwide like struggle with sexism and stuff like that. In Black Hammer, we recognize that all colonized people are equal, no matter your age, gender, race, sex, religion, like all that stuff. And so Layla is really trying to embody this, or find a organization that embodies this as well. And so Fatah, it kind of exploded in popularity. It talks about on the end of page 53, where this second half of that last paragraph on page 53, Fatah became a folk song. So basically there was this, like, Israel invaded this city in Jordan called Karamah, and Fatah was able to defend it. And people saw this and they started freaking out. So yeah, towards the end, so Fatah became a folk song, a fashion, a fetish. Its leaders, cadre, officer, clerks were regarded as saviors, saints, and seraphims, angels. Fatah, which had its leader Yasser Arafat as its chairman, was flirting with the PLO. And yeah, basically, like, everyone, like, when this happened, people were like, oh, Fatah is so great. They did this one successful thing. Let's all get on that. And so this is kind of like a PR frenzy. Like, you had even like the sellout neocolonial king of Jordan being like, I'm part of Fatah, when he's like, absolutely not. And I saw Fatah and I immediately thought of like the Black Lives Matter movement today, where they led like a couple movements and then suddenly like they just became a brand and they're stamping it on everything. The police are stamping it on the streets. Like, you have fucking what, that Congress person like dressing up in kente cloth, whatever her name is, and like all these like awful people just trying to take on this appearance of revolutionary stuff without actually revolutionary stuff. And then like, but while that all that nonsense is going on, something important happened. The Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine seized an Israeli airplane, and basically they just flew it to Algeria and like released it just as like a show of force, like, hey, look, we're here. And then the entire world, they're like so excited about Fatah, and suddenly they're like, oh wait, you can't actually do something serious. And so Israel, the World Zionist Conclave, the imperialist Arab states, the PLO, and everyone all started like bashing the PFLP, accusing it of Arab piracy. And suddenly Israel was able to count friends in progressive Arab circles. And this was an eye-opener for me, Leila says. It was the beginning of the end of my exile. And I'm back. You're muted.
Laying back. Yeah, so I think I skipped over this part, but I forgot to talk about it. But yeah, like she, whenever like they're she's part of Fatih's ranks, she was like asking them like a lot of questions. Like she was asking, like, I'm just gonna read. You don't have to like share. But she was like asking, to whom is the movement accountable? Why did it accept funds from Saudi Arabia and other reactionary sources? What's the nature of its socio-economical program? Why did it isolate itself from the Arab masses? Like she was asking all of those questions with Fatih, and there was no clear answers. And I think this is like something, whenever I joined Black Hammer in June, like one of the first like Facebook lives, because there was just a lot like going on and I didn't know what to watch. But one of the things that yeah, one of the things was like a very important live that was called, and in it like there was something that had happened. Somebody like was like trying to like manipulate somebody, one of their comrades, and like the organization was like, we don't like fuck with that, or we don't like deal with those things, and we don't like identify with those people. And it was like it's always like with in Black Hammer organization, it's always so transparent. And like as like a member of Black Hammer organization, like I know exactly what's going on. I know like what I know who I report to, I know who reports to me, I know like what we're doing, what is the plan. I know like it's very transparent in everything that we do, especially also with the masses, just like things about Hammer City, and you know, telling people about it, and also like what how much we're telling, like how we're announcing those things, and how people are always on Zoom to add those things. So that was just really important to mention about Fatih, and why she also didn't like it, as it didn't like also value her as a woman. um Finally, I'm gonna read from, perhaps it's page 46 or 47. I'm just guessing. Um, it's the part where she says, before and during my association with Fatih.
PDF, that's the, or depending on your PDF, like that's either page 46, 47, or page 55, second paragraph, the one we've been using on the stream.
Okay, so I can start reading. Before and during my association with Fatih, I had misgivings about its political and ideological attitudes, but it was the foreign operation of the PFLP, Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine, as well as Fatih's embrace of the PLO, which made me realize that Fatih was not the best Palestinian response to its enemy. I was finally convinced when I heard heroic tales about the PFLP, I'm gonna say Popular Front, underground, from the fellow teacher who had been to the occupied territories. I resolved that I must join the Popular Front. The problem was how to contact their underground in Kuwait. One day it happened by accident. I was passing by the South Arabian bookstore where a man was selling Popular Front Christmas cards. I looked carefully at his cards, all that while trying to determine whether or not he was a member of the Popular Front, or just a friend. He wouldn't comment himself. I plead, I really want to get in touch with the Popular Front very badly. I want to join, believe me. I want to join. I'm a Palestinian. I want to fight. I want to go to the occupied territories. Please tell me whom to see or to contact. Surely, if you're a supporter of the Popular Front, you would help me. Okay. He listened. Next paragraph. He listened to me plea and told me to return to the following Thursday. And told me to return the following Thursday afternoon. Okay, so anyway, they met up again. Um, so here's the part where she says, I introduced myself. Okay, I'm gonna read. I introduced myself. He was reserved and courteous. I told him who I was and said that I was anxious to join their military underground. He gave me a comradely pat on the shoulder and said, I regret to inform you, Leila, that you have to be educated first. Educated, I said, as I drew away. I'm a teacher, and I know how to read and write and all of that. No, Leila, I mean educated. I didn't mean educated in that sense, said Abu Nidal. You'll have to study the ideology and strategy of the Popular Front and work with the other comrades first. Then we will decide where your talent could best fit and be put in service for the revolution. I interrupted. I want to fight. I can't wait. What do I need to do? What do I need such fancy language for anyway? Patiently, Abu Nidal explained. Leila, the liberation of Palestine is going to be a long, long struggle. You will have to ample time to you have ample time to prove your powers. Believe me, if you're capable of fighting and wish to fight, the Popular Front will be ready to send you anywhere you're needed. I cheered by reassuring promise, and I wanted to make sure that I was not going to be left stranded. What should I do then? I asked. First of all, you will have to spread the word at your place of work and form a study group to educate yourself and undertake various projects to help the Popular Front financially. Next week, we will meet here again and continue our discussion. We will get in touch with you if you forget to get in touch with us. I left the bookstore and went home at peace with myself. I felt that I was on the road to Haifa. I was coming out of the abayas. Ooh, this is like so important. because she was like ready to fight and everything, and she finally met somebody who represented the Popular Front, which she wanted to be part of. And she was like, I want to fight, like let me fight. And I just want to remind everybody she's an Aries. um so she was like, I want to fight. And he was like, no, you have to be educated. And she was like, I am educated, I went to school, I'm a teacher, I can read and write. And he was like, no, you have to be educated politically. um you have to be educated politically, and be on the same page with the Popular Front politically. You need to form your own study group. You need to get the word out. You need to raise money financially for financial resources, and all of this stuff. I'm just thinking of the FEC committee and Black Hammer organization. I'm just thinking of what we're doing right now to spread the word about Hammer City, to raise funds for Hammer City, to get the word out about Black Hammer organization, our PPE project, our Hammers in Your Hood, all of those things. Like, this is all the stuff that we're doing, and it's so important because it's not just a protest. Like, we fight, we're physically violent. Like, yes, we do believe in armed struggle. We do believe um in violent resistance and those things, but we're not going to do it whatever. We're going to be organized. Every new comrade, we're going to ask them what they're capable of doing, what resources or what strengths they have, how we can build them, how they can work closely with their other comrades. It's not just a game. It's not just whatever. Let's go. Let's fight. It's not just let's go to the protest. Let's just yell at a police officer. Whatever. Like, it has got to be organized, 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 and it's so important. So important. Line back.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the way I think about Black Hammer in a way. It's like developing all its members, because it's not a party, we're a mass organization. So as long as you agree to our 4 principles of unity, that you want control of your land, life, and resources, and that we're all colonized people equal, the problems are colonialism, neocolonialism, and that like we're the true revolutionary group, like you should sign up and join today, blackhammer.org/join. And yeah, I mean, just like the PFLP here, they need their members not just to be adventurous and go out and like do this wild things. You need to get stronger physically, mentally, politically, like everything. And so we have a lot of training programs to develop our members and to bring them to that like cadre revolutionary level. And then like one part on page 61 like really reminded me of this, because after Leila joined the PFLP, which is like the groups she really like, you know, she's down with, there were again some exchange students who came to Beirut, I think, or no, they were in Amman in Jordan. So on page 61, the second to last paragraph, it says as they were departing. So I mean, just as some context, like these were students from Western universities who were like involved in the anti-Vietnam stuff, and they did a whole bunch of kind of, I don't know, like opportunist or like theatrical stuff. They didn't actually organize and form mass movement and train each other and unite with the masses. They, you know, they took over a building or they shouted at the police, like Chief Ismat was saying. And so Leila Khaled did not like them. And then she says, as they were departing, I was rather struck by a French anarchist student who proclaimed, "Let chaos reign," and by a German who echoed the same sentiment. I explained that the Palestinian people were an example of a society in chaos without authority and leadership, which as a result was left at the mercy of the Zionist oppressor. I asked for them what they could prescribe for us in order to overcome our kind of alienation. Beards, hair, long hair, toy guns? They merely paused, they smiled, they reflected, and they inhaled and passed their joints on in universal wonder, in this very like hippie, weak, left, like unprincipled stuff, which is so common in a lot of places worldwide. And this is very detrimental because, as we saw before, the Zionists and colonizers will pounce on any sort of weakness they can see. And so, as in contrast to that, a lot of revolutionary groups, they may call them, like as Leila Khaled said, like scientific socialists, they use this idea of democratic centralism, which there is leadership, there is authority, but we're accountable to one another as comrades. So we both have this strength from that top-down kind of coordination, but then we also have empowerment and democracy from the bottom up. So it's this top-down relationship. It's both democratic and centralized, which is powerful and also effective. Land back.
Land back. Land back.
And yeah, we're getting towards the end here. Maybe we could like wrap up in a couple minutes.
But yeah, near the end, she talks more about the Popular Front and her engagement in the Popular Front, her study groups, all the works that she was doing, the training in the camp, all of that stuff. And then she foreshadows for her like next like the mission that she was assigned near the end. And that's like a good spot to stop and to talk more about like what they did with the plane and the things, which is exciting.
I think that's the next chapter.
Yes.
Yeah.
But she talks about how she was prepared and things like that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, how they got and how much more organized it was at the Popular Front than any other organization at the time, like the PLO or the Fatah, and what when she first joined, it wasn't she had her, it's like revolutionary schooling, if you will, just getting the political education, getting the security defense things and the camp learning and things like that. Land back.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, so she was training, then she got assigned on the mission. That was the end of the chapter on a little cliffhanger. And so we'll find out next week. And so as kind of a summary overall, we saw like all the movements up to this point in the Arab revolutionary anti-colonial stuff, from like based on religious affiliations that didn't go well when colonialism happened. And then we see all the neo-colonial sellouts. We see the liberals, the social democrats, they all failed. We saw Gamal Abdel Nasser and this bureaucracy that kind of failed. That led the way to the PLO and Fatah, which had some organizational issues. And finally, we've settled at the PFLP, a revolutionary mass-based organization, which practices like scientific socialism. It's trying to train people, get them really strong. And we're going to see where this leads next week. So maybe we could stay on for like 5 minutes if anyone has questions, if anyone wants to continue to donate. But otherwise, Thank you so much, everybody. Land back. Land back. So what? Anyone got questions?
Thank you, Commander. Land back. Yeah, or any comments? We can wait for maybe one donation before we leave.
Yeah. GoFundMe.com, Build Hammer City. Ali has the nicest smile. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Vid. Come back next week. You'll see me smile again.
That's good.
We keep winning.
Yes. Land back. Thank you, Chief Ina. Land back. Land back.
Sufi Akram, land back. Thank you, Sufi.
Yeah, and if you're not a member of Black Hammer, you can also read our 4 Principles of Unity. If you agree with the 4 Principles of Unity, you're basically a member, so just fill that page out at blackhammer.com/join. And let's donate to Black Hammer to build within our Black Hammer project, Hammer City. Land back.
Who's gonna donate?
Just one donation before we leave.
Come on, I'm hungry. Gotta get some lunch.
Yeah, it's time to go.
Got my next meeting.
It's a Saturday.
No, it's Sunday. It's Sunday. Build Hammer City.
Oh, Sunday. I forgot. Wait. Let's build Hammer City. You can donate through Cash App, Venmo, GoFundMe.
Anyone got a question too?
Questions, comments?
Donate. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. I think we can end the live.
All right, land back. Thank you, everyone.
Land back.